Hello, my friends. This is Deepak, and we are continuing with our conversation with luminaries, influencers, and people who are making a radical difference in our understanding of ourselves, the world, well-being, and the future of longevity. So I have the distinct pleasure today to welcome a very special guest, Mark Hyman, good friend and a New York Times bestselling author of many books. This is his latest. It's called Young Forever: The Secrets to Living Your Longest, Healthiest Life. So thanks again, Mark, for joining us, first of all.
So great to be with you.
Well, thank you. So, I've been reading a book and I'm almost finished, but
Wow.
let's start with, how long have you been planning this book and what ultimately led you to write it? Who is this for? And why is this personal to you?
Well, if you have a body, it's probably, what's that, Deepak?
I read the beginning. I read some of your health challenges. I didn't know all of that. But tell us a little bit about your journey here, up to here.
Yeah, well, it's basically the culmination of all the work I've been doing my whole life to synthesize this new model of medicine that's about creating health. You've been talking about it forever, and I learned from you very on about the science of creating health through Ayurveda and other models of medicine. But we in traditional science don't have a good framework for it until now. And we've now emerged into this really big paradigm shift about how we think about health and disease from the perspective of the root causes, from the perspective of understanding the body as a system and not treating disease, but creating health. And through the lens of longevity science, I've been able to sort of take a little different view of it than most traditional people in the longevity space, because I look at it through the lens of systems biology and functional medicine. And for me, it's very personal because I got very sick multiple times throughout my life, from mercury poisoning to Lyme disease to mold exposure to autoimmune diseases, all this stuff. I literally had to bring myself back from the dead, and also structural problems that we get as we get older. I've had a lot of back issues, back surgery. So I've really got to explore all the realms of healing out there and the limitations of traditional medicine, but also the opportunities in the emerging science of longevity science to reframe how we think about aging itself. And rather than think of it as a normal, inevitable process of decrepitude, decline, and frailty, to think of it as a process of abnormal phenomena that we can do something about, that we actually can not only extend our lifespan, but our health span, which means how many healthy years we're alive, because most people spend the last 20% of their life in poor health. And we can literally reverse our biological age. We can't change the date on the clock, our chronological age, but we can change our biological age. And that to me is so exciting. And there's study after study that's coming out showing us exactly how to do that. And I've done that with myself. I've literally turned back the clock 20 years. I'm biologically 43, even though I just turned 63 chronologically.
So I'm speaking to Mark Hyman, MD. The book is Forever Young: The Secrets to Living Your Longest, Healthiest Life. And Mark just told us about his health challenges, but the fact that he's now 63 and his biological age is 20 years younger, which is 43. So, Mark, I'm 76, and I'm embarrassed to say I've never been sick in my life. I do yoga about every day for the last 40 years and meditation. And I also have changed my perception of what it means to age, perception of the fact that our body is not a physical material entity. It's a modified form of consciousness. And also perception of time, how we metabolize time influences how we age. There's a beautiful sutra in the Yoga Vashishta. Time is the consumer and we are its food. So we are time's food. So, I've decided not to identify with the experience of time as well and, settle into that timeless being. But leave that alone.
I've seen you get healthier over time. Actually, I've seen you change and get even healthier.
I don't know. when I was looking at, biological age measures long time ago, it was blood pressure, bone density, body temperature regulation, fat content in the body, cholesterol, HDL, those markers, ratios,
The usual, right?
skin thickness, hormone levels, etc., immune function. But you must have more sophisticated markers now. What did you measure when you got your 43 years of biological age? What
Well,
did you
what's
actually measure?
really, well, you've always talked about how lifestyle transmutes our biology, and the scientists in longevity have talked about these things that underlie all aging and disease called the hallmarks of aging. And these are things that go wrong that we can do something about. And there are ones that are meta to others. But one of the ones that we can actually look at that tracks our biological age is our epigenome. Our genes are fixed, as we know. We can't change our genes except through gene editing, but we can change how those genes are expressed. And the epigenome was like the piano player on top of the piano keys that plays the piano of our genes, and can create all sorts of things, from chaotic cacophony to beautiful symphonies. And in the technology we've developed, Steve Horvath, who's a longevity scientist, has been able to look at the changes in our epigenome over time and map that to our biological age. So I measured my epigenome, and the epigenome is influenced by what we eat, by how we think, just what you said, by our type of exercise, our fitness level, by environmental toxins, by stress, by our nutritional levels, by our microbiome, by everything that's washing over us every moment. And so we literally have the power to change our biological age with interventions that are cheap, available to most of us, and are really unexplored for most people. And to me, I'm kind of very interested in how we can start to make these ideas and these practices accessible to people, and realize they don't have to kind of follow this trajectory of decline and disease and death. And that maybe our natural lifespan is 120, and we've just been doing things to disrupt it by how we live. And so I measured my epigenome. We can measure our telomere length, which is one of the hallmarks of aging. We can measure, sort of downstream things like inflammation markers, or immunological clock, our ability to regulate nutrients, which we can measure through insulin signaling. So there's a whole bunch of these hallmarks of aging that we can now track: our mitochondrial function, our microbiome. And so by doing this, we can actually start to see where we are in the trajectory of longevity or disease, and we can start to incorporate practices to turn on these longevity switches. So the body has these innate systems for healing, and we just have to learn how to turn them on.
I'm familiar, of course, with things like telomerase levels, telomere length, inflammatory markers. We did publish a study in Nature a while ago after a retreat, where the genes that were responsible for self-regulation, homeostasis, went up in their activity after a 1-week Ayurvedic and meditation retreat. Some went up 17-fold over baseline. Telomerase level went up by 40%, and Elizabeth Blackburn was one of the co-authors.
Yeah.
And then all the genes that were responsible for inflammation, Alzheimer's, cancer, so forth, went down significantly. But when you say epigenetic profile or activity, are you referring to the on-off switches, methylation, deacylation? What are you
exactly?
What do you exactly measure? The switches?
Yeah, so exactly, Deepak. It's the DNA methylation, which is one of the main, and probably the main, regulatory way in which our genes are controlled through the epigenome. So DNA methylation is like little tags on our genes that mark the places on our genome which should get expressed or not, turns off or on genes. So those epigenetic marks, the DNA methylation marks, can be measured by a sample of blood. And then we can track it over time to determine what interventions work or don't work. And there's been a number of studies with vitamin D, for example, or quercetin, or dietary changes of functional. The most impactful reversal and most rapid reversal was a functional medicine intervention using a very powerful anti-inflammatory, phytochemical-rich, DNA methylating diet with some simple lifestyle practices, reversed biological age by 3 years in just 8 weeks. So we now know we can do this from a scientific perspective. And the question is, what's the limit? How far can we go? And then, of course, there's all the weird and wacky stuff that's coming down the pike around longevity, such as Yamanaka factors and ways to reprogram our stem cells and make a younger you. But that, I think that's a little down the road. But there's things we can do right now that I'm using every day, that I've done today, that allow us to activate these ancient healing systems that are embedded in us to keep us alive and surviving, that we basically screw up all the time by the way we eat and the way we live and the way we think. And you're right. I always say thoughts are things. Thoughts are powerful, and they're basically biological signaling molecules. Our thoughts are signaling molecules that affect everything in our biology, from our microbiome to our immune system, to our gene expression, to our telomeres, to our immune system. All of it is regulated by what we're thinking.
Yeah, my training, as you know, was neuroendocrinology in Boston. Seymour Reichland, and that was way back in the 80s when we were looking at the neuropeptides, serotonin, opiates, oxytocin, anandamide, and dopamine. And one of my colleagues one day, Candice Pert, she said, these are the molecules of attention. And that's when I started my career in this direction. By the way, my mentor, Seymour Reichland, who was then the president of the Endocrine Society, he was at Tufts and over here in Boston, but he now lives in Arizona. He just turned 97, and he comes every year.
Wow.
Every year to teach on a sabbatical. I just had breakfast with him a few months ago at Balthazar. 97. If he catches a snake in his garden, he still looks for neuropeptides in the hypothalamus. It argues with me about the hard problem of consciousness. So that's a good example. They're right there. My mentor, Seymour Reichland. So basically what Dr. Hyman is telling us is that our experience, all experience, any experience, mental, emotional, perceptual, physical, eating, breathing, digestion, metabolism, elimination, the experience of the five senses, how we interpret those experiences, our thoughts, feelings, imagination, desires, aspirations, fears, they all turn these switches on and off that we call epigenetics. And so ultimately by actually looking at the body as the metabolism of experience, we can actually regulate our biological age. That's what you're saying essentially. Now, I work with Rudy Tanzi at Harvard, and when we started talking about this a few years ago, we got a little bit of a pushback from the academics, So I had actually had some debates, public debates with Richard Dawkins, who, as you know, is kind of a militant atheist. And, when we started talking about epigenetics, he said, oh, that's the fashion of the day. And he kind of dismissed it totally. And because he's an evolutionary biologist, and evolutionary biology has its own rules, and epigenetics was then very recent, and he dismissed it. But there were others. There were some other people in England who were epigenetic experts, and they only talked about the environment in terms of the physical environment, toxins in the environment, this, that, the other. Never spoke about the mental environment. In fact, they were very dubious that the mental environment does anything to epigenetic switches. But it's obvious. If you're stressed, you raise cortisol and adrenaline and inflammatory markers. If you're happy, you're feeling joy, empathy, compassion, you do the other. You trigger these dopamine, serotonin. That has to involve genetic activity, right?
Absolutely. I mean, we know that some of the markers of societies that live a long time, the blue zones, is the meaning and purpose and community and belonging and connection and love. I mean, these are seem to be more amorphous ideas, but they're actually biological phenomena, and they impact us directly. So
would you say
having a close community is the most important, as important as maybe eating? I mean, having meaning and purpose can extend your life 7 years. So we know these things are having impact.
is mainstream science accepting that mental activity influences gene regulation or not yet?
I think absolutely. I mean, there's a whole field of sociogenomics, which is fascinating. I didn't realize I kind of came up with this term on my own after being in Haiti and seeing the power of community to heal, infectious disease by using accompaniment, what Paul Farmer called accompaniment. And I use this to actually help heal a huge faith-based community in Saddleback Church in California, where we got 15,000 people to help each other through connection and community lose 250,000 pounds in a year. And it was really the science of this is very, very solid. You look at Christakis's work about connectedness and the power of our social relationships to affect our genes. It's very clear. So we know this on a very intimate level, that if you're with someone and you're having a positive, loving connection, you're turning on all the anti-inflammatory genes. If you're having an actual conflict, an inflamed conversation, you're going to turn on inflammation in your body. So, our minds are
This
one of the most
happens
powerful things that
almost
determines longevity.
instantly. This happens
Yeah.
almost instantly. I give you bad news, and certain genes go on to create inflammation. Then I give
Yeah.
you good news, then the other genes turn on, and these ones switch off, right?
Yeah.
Like almost
Yeah,
instantly.
absolutely.
Right?
I mean,
So,
even epigenetics, I mean, can be influenced by cuddling and touching, and the science of this is well laid out. I quote all these studies in the book. It seems very kind of light and fluffy, but it's actually not. There's really hard science behind this, as there is for diet and exercise and certain phytochemicals and hormesis practices like cotton cold therapies and other things that are really being used to activate these endogenous, these innate healing systems.
I'm speaking to Dr. Mark Hyman. The book is called Young Forever: Secrets to Living Your Longest, Healthiest Life. I'm almost done with this book. So part one is the quest for the fountain of youth, the root causes of aging, biological versus chronological age, the 10 hallmarks of aging. And then the second part is optimizing your health span, lifespan, including things like 7 core biological systems, eating for longevity, moving for longevity, advanced aging innovations. Then part 3 is a whole program. That's the Young Forever program, and it includes testing, food as medicine, and some of these new things that we're learning about, the Forever Young supplements for longevity. So I have personally been taking fisetin, quercetin, nicotinamide mononucleotide for a long time. But recently, I, as you know, I've at my age, I started taking metformin, and I'm also taking rapamycin after I did some tests. So, do you have anything to say about these signal molecules?
Absolutely. What you're talking about are these incredible, from the phytochemical world, molecules that speak to different receptors and turn on longevity switches. So fisetin, quercetin, and other ones like urolithin A, all can activate these ancient pathways that particularly are related to nutrient sensing. And they include things like mTOR and insulin signaling and AMPK and sirtuins that activate DNA repair, that turn off inflammation, that induce autophagy, self-cleaning, or cannibalism that's important for taking out the garbage in your body, essentially. So we know these phytochemicals are really important, and they're highly neglected in our diet. And that's a big part of it. But you also talked about these 2 drugs, and these 2 drugs, metformin and rapamycin, are the subject of intense research in longevity. And I definitely wrote about them in the book. I have some strong opinions about them. I think metformin can be very helpful. As we get older, we become more insulin resistant. It takes a lot more work to keep that at bay. We have to exercise more. We have to eat, more protein, less starch, less sugar, good fats to really regulate that. I think there's a large trial going on called the TAME trial, targeting aging with metformin. And that is a randomized controlled trial that will produce data that will help us determine whether or not metformin is in fact leading to longevity. But my view is that lifestyle works far better than metformin. If metformin worked better than lifestyle, I would say for sure use it. I think it has some adverse mitochondrial effects, can cause digestive symptoms for some people that are usually short-lived. But the big issue is how well does it work? And I think in the diabetes prevention trial, lifestyle worked much, much better than metformin. And this was, a number of years ago when the diet was a low-fat diet, which is not the diet you'd recommend for diabetes now. It's more of a low-starch sugar diet. And even that diet was better than metformin. That was about 30% effective with metformin, about 58% effective in reducing the progression of prediabetes to type 2 diabetes with metformin. So I think I'm kind of cautious about metformin. Rapamycin is very interesting. It's a drug that was developed because scientists went to Easter Island in the 60s and they scraped off some stuff on the back of one of those statues. Maybe the aliens put them there, who knows? And they thought it might be helpful for something, and they found it might be an antifungal, but it didn't work so well. And it was found to have immune modulating properties. It's used in transplant medicine at high doses. But it seems to also inhibit this thing called mTOR, which is a pathway that's very important in inducing longevity through this process of autophagy or self-cleaning. And it's a really interesting phenomenon to be able to use this compound as in lower doses intermittently to activate this process of autophagy to inhibit mTOR. And actually mTOR stands for mammalian target of rapamycin. So literally this receptor, this pathway is named after this drug. and it's I think it has very interesting properties. And I think you take it at night, let's say 3 days a week, 5 weeks on, 8 weeks off, and there's many different protocols. I'd be curious to know what you're doing. And I think it can help with improving immune function. It can help with self-cannibalism. It can help with many of the other longevity switches that I talk about. So I'm actually cautiously optimistic about that.
I'm speaking to Mark Hyman. The book is Young Forever, The Secrets to Living Your Longest, Healthiest Life. And yes, on both rapamycin and metformin, if anyone's listening to us right now, you shouldn't take it casually. Consult a physician.
No.
And then, you can, if your physician and you agree, then something to try. So I take a protocol rapamycin now 6 milligrams once a week. That's what I do. And I get tested frequently. And of course, I'm doing metformin too. So
you should measure your biological age, Deepak, and see with the DNA methylation tests how it's going.
I will now
that
you bring it up. 76, and I have no sickness, Mark. My body is totally blissful every time I wake up, and I have the most amazing sleep. So I can't complain. Turn 76.
I love that.
What am I going to do for the rest of my life? And what I'm going to do is just my own.
You're in middle age now. You're just in middle age.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you when I get to middle age. Okay.
Okay. Maybe you're in your adolescence. Who knows?
Well, the idea is to go all the way back and disappear into an orgasm, but that's another story.
That's another podcast.
That would be good exit strategy. Okay, my friends. So this is the book. I have really been inspired by this book. Pick it up, read it, and give us your feedback. It's very complete. The book is very complete because everything that Mark talks about, he backs up with solid science. The book has been endorsed by all the longevity experts, including our friend David Sinclair, who's kind of making a splash in the world right now with his signal molecules and so on. But he doesn't talk so much about lifestyle as you do, which really complements everything else that these guys are talking about. So congratulations, Mark. I'm sure, like your other books, it's going to be a bestseller. I compliment you on this, and I shall be speaking more about this book as I talk to my audiences. Any last words? What's the limit?
Yeah.
What's the limit?
I think,
now we say, what about this whole thing about Hayflick limit and 120 years? Do you buy into all that?
You mean the longevity escape velocity theory?
Yeah, no, but I read about that's beautiful longevity escape velocity. But forever people used to talk about Hayflick limit. Cells divide so many times, and then after that, it's done. And that you can't go beyond 120. And now we don't, of course, have examples of people who have gone a little bit beyond 120. So I'm just asking you, are we rethinking this whole thing?
Yes, I think it's being rethought, and partly because of discoveries. Hold on a second. Someone's trying to call me. It's partly being rethought because of discoveries of things like the Yamanaka factors, which is a little sci-fi, but essentially it's these transcription factors that help our stem cells differentiate into who we are. So it makes our skin, our brain, our kidney. And when they differentiate, those transcription factors get turned off. Well, there's this scientist in Japan, Yamanaka, who won the Nobel Prize for discovering these things that actually can reprogram your stem cells to a younger you. They're what we call inducible pluripotent stem cells. And there may be a time they're doing this in animals now where they're literally, making blind mice see by inserting these factors, turning them on, and basically getting the body to repair itself. So if your skin gets a little lower in elasticity, or you get some wrinkles, or your joints get arthritis, or your heart starts to age, or your brain's not so good, you can literally insert these transcription factors that can be turned on by some outside switch, turn back your biology to a younger you, and then turn off that switch when you get, let's say, to 25. You don't want to go all the way back to zero. And that's coming down the pike. It's kind of exciting. So I think we really don't know about the true ability of our biology to repair, heal. And I think that's what's exciting. Now, doing the basic things that I talk about in the book, and I'm a physician, so I see patients, I'm a doctor, and I'm interested in a practical application of the science. And I explain very clear in the book what you should do diagnostically to figure out where you're at, the kinds of lifestyle things you can do, some of the advances that are coming on the pike, and some simple practices that now actually can start to really achieve an extension of your health span and your lifespan, for sure, to at least 100. Probably to 120. There may be a person born today that's going to be lived to 150. I'm certainly counting on it. So I think we're kind of in this incredibly rapid iteration of science in the longevity space, which has mostly been neglected because aging has been thought to be normal. There's nothing we can do about it. But I think that's being challenged by scientists. And I think that's the edge we're pushing up against.
One last question before I let you go. So, epigenetics, of course, is about upgrading the activity of our genes, the 25,000 human genes we have. But then you have these millions of genes, which we call the microbiome. And I think if you change your diet, you can actually change the population of the microbiome. And if the genetic information is the software and the body is the printout, then it looks like you can change 90% of the genetic information and upgrade the other human. Is that a fair thing to say?
I think it is, Deepak. I think, I included that most scientists talk about the 9 hallmarks of aging. I added one, which is imbalances in the microbiome. And as we age, our microbiome degrades, but there's ways to keep it healthy. And what's really striking is that what your genes do is they produce proteins. So there's 20, 25,000 genes, let's say, in human genome. There may be 2 to 4 to 5 million genes. You might have 100 to even 200 times as many genes producing proteins in your microbiome as your own genes. And those proteins are often absorbed, and peptides are absorbed into the body, and they are regulating our everything. Literally, I was on a panel with Stan Hazer from Cleveland Clinic, who's the lead researcher in the microbiome and heart disease. And I said, how much of our biochemistry do you think might be from metabolites from the microbiome? And he's like, could be a third to half of all the things in our blood come from these critters in our gut. And we know this. When you have an upset tummy, or you have an imbalanced microbiome, it affects your mood, it affects inflammation, it affects your cognitive function. And so keeping your microbiome healthy as you age is a critical component of longevity.
I've been speaking to Mark Hyman, Dr. Mark Hyman, Young Forever is the book, The Secrets to Living Your Longest, Healthiest Life. Pick it up, read it, digest all the material, metabolize the information, and you might have a longer, healthier life. Mark, thank you very much, and look forward to more discussions.
Thank you, Deepak. Hope to see you soon.